Welcome to Dark Mysteries. Before we dive into tonight's terrifying stories, I have one question. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. If you want more nights filled with horror, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, dim the lights and step into the darkness. The old research station sat 40 miles outside of TRUE Alaska, buried under 3 months of winter darkness. When David arrived for his 6-month rotation as the sole night watchman, he thought isolation would be his biggest challenge. He was wrong. Dead wrong. The previous watchman had left suddenly. No explanation, no forwarding address. Just an empty room and a hastily scrawled note. Don't trust the readings after midnight. David found it tucked behind the monitoring equipment, as if hidden there deliberately. But what readings? What could possibly happen after midnight in a place where the sun doesn't rise for months? For the first 2 weeks, everything seemed normal. David monitored the weather instruments, checked the backup generators, and maintained the communication systems. The station was studying atmospheric conditions during the polar night, collecting data that scientists would analyze come spring. Simple work, really. Just him, the equipment, and the endless Arctic darkness pressing against the windows. But then the anomalies started. It began with the temperature sensors. Every night at exactly 12:47 a.m., they would register impossible readings, minus 127 degrees Fahrenheit. That's colder than anything ever recorded in Alaska, colder than it should be possible at this location. David recalibrated the instruments, checked for malfunctions, even replaced the sensors entirely. But every night, same time, same impossible reading. Then came the sounds. Have you ever heard ice sing? In the Arctic, when temperatures drop rapidly, the ice makes sounds. Groaning, cracking, sometimes almost musical. But what David heard wasn't that. It was deliberate, rhythmic. Like footsteps on the metal roof of the station. Circling, always circling. He'd grab his flashlight and rush outside, boots crunching on the frozen ground. Breath forming clouds in the minus 40 air. Nothing. No tracks in the snow. No signs of wildlife. Just the darkness and his own rapid heartbeat. The isolation plays tricks on your mind up here. That's what David told himself. When you're alone for weeks with nothing but darkness and cold, your brain starts filling in the gaps, creating patterns where none exist, imagining threats in every shadow. But how do you explain the video footage? The station had security cameras, 4 of them, covering all approaches. David reviewed the footage religiously, partly for security, mostly for something to do. One night, Camera 3 caught something. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing at the edge of the camera's range. It didn't move like a person. It didn't move like anything David had ever seen. It seemed to flicker as if it wasn't entirely solid, and then it was gone. David told himself it was a trick of the light. Arctic conditions can create mirages, distortions. But then he saw it again, and again. Always at the edge of visibility. Always after midnight, always watching. The communication equipment started acting up next. Static would flood the channels, but not random static. There were patterns in it, almost like voices, speaking in no language David recognized. He recorded hours of it, planning to send it to the main base for analysis. But when he played back the recordings in daylight hours, they were empty, just dead air. By the 3rd month, David was keeping a detailed log of every incident. The impossible temperature readings had spread to other instruments. The barometric pressure would spike and plummet in patterns that defied physics. The wind sensors would show hurricane-force winds while the air outside was perfectly still. And always, those footsteps on the roof. Then he found the other logs, hidden in a maintenance panel wrapped in plastic. journals from previous watchmen going back 20 years. Each told the same story, the anomalies, the figure at the edge of darkness, the sounds that shouldn't exist. And each journal ended the same way, abruptly, mid-sentence, as if the writer had simply vanished. David's hands shook as he read the final entry from his predecessor. It's not outside anymore. It's in here with me. The instruments weren't malfunctioning. They were warning us. The cold it brings isn't from this world. If you're reading this, leave. Leave now, before midnight. Before it notices you've seen it. Before it decides you know too much. That night, David packed his bags. He would radio for emergency extraction in the morning, make up some excuse about equipment failure. But as he turned to leave the monitoring room, every screen lit up at once. The same impossible reading on every instrument, minus 273.15 degrees Celsius. Absolute zero, the theoretical point where all molecular motion stops, the death of heat itself. The lights went out. In the darkness, David heard it clearly for the first time. Not footsteps on the roof, but something breathing. Something massive. Something that had been waiting in the endless polar night long before humans ever set foot in Alaska. The emergency generator kicked in, flooding the station with harsh red light, and in that crimson glow, David saw it. The figure from the cameras stood in the doorway. Not solid, not gas, but something in between. Something that hurt to look at directly. Its eyes, if you could call them eyes, were points of absolute darkness. Darker than the polar night. Darker than the space between stars. When it spoke, the sound came from everywhere and nowhere at once. You've been recording us. David ran. Out into the Arctic night, into the killing cold. Preferring the certainty of freezing to death over whatever that thing was. Behind him, the station's lights flickered and died, one by one. His last radio transmission was picked up by a weather station in Fairbanks. Don't send anyone else. Board it up. Forget it exists. Some things are meant to stay in the dark. They found David 3 days later, frozen solid, 5 miles from the station. His expression was one of absolute terror. The station itself was empty, all the equipment destroyed, the data erased. Except for one thing. A single temperature reading, still displayed on one miraculously intact monitor. Minus 273.15 degrees Celsius. The station was permanently closed after that. Officially, it was due to budget cuts. But if you know where to look in the classified Arctic research files, you'll find reports of similar incidents at other remote locations. Always during the polar night. Always preceded by impossible temperature readings. Always ending the same way. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. Some darkness isn't meant to be studied. And in the depths of an Alaskan winter, when the sun refuses to rise and the cold becomes something more than just temperature. Remember David's warning. Don't trust the readings after midnight, because something else lives in that darkness. Something that's been waiting far longer than we've been watching, and once it knows you've seen it, there's nowhere cold enough to hide. There's a reason locals in Nome don't talk about the Anvil Creek mine anymore. Not the famous one from the gold rush days, but the smaller operation that opened in 1987 and closed just 6 months later. Sarah Martinez learned this the hard way when she arrived to investigate the disappearance of 3 miners who vanished without a trace 35 years ago. As a documentary filmmaker specializing in Alaska's forgotten history, Sarah thought she'd struck gold with this story. 3 experienced miners, a profitable claim, and then nothing. No bodies, no explanation, no official investigation. Just an abandoned mine shaft and 35 years of silence. What she discovered in those tunnels will haunt you as much as it haunts her. The locals tried to warn her. When Sarah mentioned the Anvil Creek incident at the diner in town, Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eyes turned away. One old-timer, deep into his coffee, muttered something about things that shouldn't be disturbed before shuffling out. But Sarah was determined. She had permits, equipment, and a local guide named Tommy who needed the money badly enough to ignore his own reservations. They entered the mine on a Tuesday morning. The entrance had been sealed with concrete blocks, but time and weather had created gaps large enough to squeeze through. Inside, their headlamps cut through darkness so thick it seemed to swallow the light. The air was wrong immediately. Not stale, like you'd expect from a sealed mine, but fresh. Moving. As if the mine was breathing. The first level was exactly what you'd expect. Abandoned equipment, rusted cart tracks, support beams groaning under the weight of time. Sarah filmed everything, noting the strange lack of graffiti or signs of trespassers. In 35 years, nobody had been curious enough or brave enough to explore. That should have been her first warning, but it was the drilling equipment that made Tommy stop cold. "This isn't mining equipment," he said, examining a massive drill bit. "This is core sampling gear, deep earth stuff. They weren't looking for gold." Sarah filmed as Tommy explained that the equipment was military grade, designed to reach depths commercial operations never attempted. Whatever those three miners were doing, it wasn't standard prospecting. They found the camp on the third level. 3 sleeping bags still rolled out. Canned goods unopened. Coffee in cups frozen in time. Everything suggested the miners had simply vanished mid-routine. No signs of struggle. No notes. Just absence. But there was something else. Something that made Sarah's skin crawl. The walls were covered in markings, not graffiti, but precise geometric patterns carved deep into the rock. They seemed to pulse in the headlamp light, creating optical illusions that made her dizzy. Tommy refused to film them, backing away with a fear Sarah had never seen in the usually steady guide. "My grandmother told stories," he whispered, "about things the Inuit found when they first came to this land. Things already here, waiting. She said some knowledge was buried for a reason. They should have left then, should have listened to the instinct screaming in their minds. But Sarah needed answers, and the shaft continued deeper. Much deeper than any gold mine had a right to go. The temperature rose instead of dropping. The air grew thick, almost syrupy, and then they heard it. Singing. Faint, distant, but unmistakably human. 3 voices, harmonizing in a language neither Sarah nor Tommy recognized. It was coming from below, far below, deeper than the mine should have extended. Sarah wanted to follow the sound, but Tommy grabbed her arm. "Those are the miners," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Same voices my uncle heard when he worked security here. Same voices people sometimes hear on quiet nights in town. They're still down there, Sarah. Still singing, still mining, but they're not mining for gold anymore." The singing grew louder, and with it came a vibration through the rock. Not mechanical, but organic, like a heartbeat. The patterns on the walls began to glow, actually glow, with a phosphorescent light that hurt to look at directly. Sarah's camera started malfunctioning, the footage distorting into impossible shapes. Then they saw the hole. At the end of the tunnel, where the mine shaft should have ended, was an opening. Not blasted or drilled, but melted. The rock around it was smooth as glass, twisted into those same geometric patterns. The singing was coming from down there, along with a light that shouldn't exist. Not electric, not flame, but something older. Sarah aimed her camera at the hole, and through the viewfinder she saw them. 3 figures standing at the edge of an enormous cavern. They wore mining gear, but they weren't moving like humans anymore. They swayed in unison, their headlamps creating a synchronized pattern. And behind them, something massive shifted in the darkness. something that had never seen sunlight, something that had been waiting. Tommy yanked her back just as one of the figures turned. Even from that distance, Sarah could see its face. It was human, technically, but the eyes reflected light like an animal's. And when it smiled, the expression was too wide, too knowing, too hungry. They ran, up through the tunnels, past the glowing walls, past the abandoned camp. Behind them, the singing followed, growing louder, more insistent. Other voices joined in, dozens, maybe hundreds, all harmonizing in that alien language. The mine itself seemed to resist their escape, tunnels stretching longer than they should, turns appearing where none had been before. They burst from the mine entrance as the sun was setting, gasping in the Arctic air. Tommy immediately began piling rocks against the entrance, his hands bloody from the effort. Sarah helped, and together they sealed it as best they could. But even through the rocks, they could hear it. The singing, growing fainter but never stopping. Sarah's footage, what little survived uncorrupted, shows nothing but darkness and distorted audio. The authorities dismissed her story as exhaustion and altitude sickness. The mine was permanently sealed with industrial-grade concrete the following week, officially due to structural instability. But on quiet nights in Nome, when the wind dies down and the aurora borealis dances overhead, people still report hearing it. Singing from underground. 3 voices, perfectly harmonized, calling others to join them. Calling them down to where the gold isn't gold, where the miners aren't miners anymore, and where something vast and patient waits in the warm darkness beneath the permafrost. Sarah left Alaska the day after the mine was sealed. She never published her documentary, but sometimes, in her dreams, she still hears them singing. Still feels the pull to go back, to go deeper, to discover what those 3 miners found that was worth more than gold, more than life, more than humanity itself. And sometimes, on the edge of sleep, she finds herself humming along. The rescue team found Marcus Chen's body at 14,000 feet on Denali's west buttress, frozen in a position that made no sense. He was sitting upright, facing away from the mountain, his camera still strapped around his neck. But it wasn't how he died that disturbed the rescuers. It was what they found on his camera. 27 photos that shouldn't exist, taken 3 days after his satellite phone placed his last distress call. Marcus was an experienced climber, the kind who'd summited Everest twice and made a living guiding wealthy clients up dangerous peaks. When he set out to solo Denali in late October, everyone who knew him tried to talk him out of it. October on Denali is suicide season. The storms are violent, the temperature's lethal, and you're completely alone. But Marcus insisted he needed to document something he'd seen on his last guided expedition that his clients hadn't noticed. His satellite messages started normally enough. Day 1, weather holding, making good time. Day 2, reached 11,000 feet, strange tracks in fresh snow, not human, not wildlife I recognize. Day 3, the silence here is wrong. No wind, no sound at all, even my breathing seems muted. That was the last coherent message. Day 4's message was different. They're watching from the ice. Been here longer than the mountain. Don't come looking for me. The rescue team dismissed it as altitude sickness, hypoxia making him hallucinate, until they developed the photos from his camera. The first 12 photos were standard climbing shots. The route, the weather, the endless white expanse of Alaska spread below. But photo 13 changed everything. It showed what looked like a structure embedded in the ice wall. Not natural formation, but geometric, deliberate, ancient. The kind of thing that shouldn't exist at 14,000 feet on a mountain that's been mapped and climbed thousands of times. The photos progressed, each one getting closer to the structure. By photo 18, you could see details, symbols carved into what looked like black stone, impossible smooth, untouched by centuries of ice and wind. The symbols hurt to look at directly, seeming to shift and writhe even in still photographs. One rescuer who stared too long at them reported nightmares for weeks afterward. But it was photo 20 that made the rescue team request immediate extraction. The photo showed Marcus's own camp from a distance, an impossible distance, as if someone or something had taken his camera and photographed him from across the glacier. In the image, Marcus sits by his tent, unaware he's being watched. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. In the background, barely visible against the night sky, were lights. Not stars, not aircraft, but arranged in a pattern that matched the symbols on the ice structure. Photos 21 through 26 were darkness, pure black frames that shouldn't have used any memory on a digital camera. But when the rescue team enhanced them, they found something. Shapes in the darkness. Tall, impossibly thin figures standing in a circle. They weren't wearing climbing gear. They weren't wearing anything identifiable as clothing. They stood motionless in temperatures that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. The final photo, number 27, was taken in daylight. It showed Marcus himself, looking directly at the camera, but he was standing, healthy, smiling. The timestamp read 3 days after his distress call, after he should have been dead from exposure. Behind him, the mountain stretched endlessly, but something was wrong with the perspective. Denali seemed taller, older, as if the photo was taken centuries ago when the mountain was different. The rescue team leader, Janet Rodriguez, made the decision to investigate the coordinates from Marcus's photos. What they found at the ice wall made them immediately contact the Park Service to restrict all climbing permits for the season. The structure was real, the symbols were real, and around it, in a perfect circle, were 7 more bodies. Climbers who'd gone missing over the past 40 years, all sitting in the same position as Marcus, all facing outward, all with cameras. Every camera contained similar photos: the structure, the symbols, the darkness, the figures, and always, a final photo of the dead climber standing and smiling, with the wrong mountain behind them. The Park Service sealed the area, claiming unstable ice conditions. But Janet Rodriguez quit her job the day after the recovery mission. In her resignation letter, she wrote only, "Some places weren't meant to be climbed. Some things weren't meant to be found." Marcus was right. They've been watching longer than the mountain has stood. The official report lists Marcus Chen's death as severe altitude sickness leading to hypothermia. The photos were classified as hallucinations captured by a malfunctioning camera affected by extreme cold. But if you know the right people in the Alaska mountaineering community, you'll hear whispers about the climbers who've seen the lights on Denali's upper slopes, about the impossible footprints that appear in fresh snow at altitudes where no one's climbing, about the sounds of cameras clicking in the darkness of Arctic night. And if you're very unlucky, you'll meet someone who's enhanced those black photos from Marcus's camera, someone who's looked long enough to see what's really in that darkness. They don't climb anymore. They don't go above tree line. They don't even like to look at mountains. Because once you've seen the things that watch from Denali's heights, you understand that we're not climbing alone up there. The mountain has been there for millions of years. But according to what Marcus found, according to those symbols that predate any known human civilization, the mountain isn't the oldest thing on those slopes. Something else claimed Denali long before humans gave it a name. Something that watches. Something that waits. Something that occasionally takes a photographer to document its presence, leaving them seated in the snow like sentinels, facing outward, warning others away. Marcus Chen's camera is now locked in a Park Service evidence room in Anchorage. The memory card was destroyed, officially due to data corruption. But sometimes, park rangers on Denali report seeing a lone figure at 14,000 feet, sitting in the snow, camera raised. When they investigate, they find nothing but fresh footprints leading higher up the mountain. Always higher. Toward where the structure waits in the ice, covered now in fresh snow. Invisible but never gone. Some mountains are meant to be conquered. Denali, it seems, was meant to be left alone.